Visiting Wilkes County on business or pleasure? Stay in Wilkesboro at the Holiday Inn Express, Hampton Inn, or Red Roof Inn and Suites. Enjoy Southern hospitality, cozy rooms, and a complimentary breakfast. Explore the mountains and then relax with us. You've earned it. Closed captions for this episode of Life in Wilkes is brought to you by Deal Insurance Agency in Wilkesboro, an award-winning, experienced, family-owned and operated agency with service and coverage that goes above and beyond expectations. Join us on a captivating journey as we explore the charm, history, and vibrant culture of Wilkes County. Discover the hidden gems, inspiring stories, and remarkable people that make Wilkes a place worth knowing and celebrating. Join us now and experience the unique essence of Life in Wilkes.
Gerald Lankford, good morning.
Good morning, Carl.
It's awfully good to see you.
Good to see you, my friend.
You know, when the name Gerald Lankford is invoked, people say awfully nice things about you. Do you pay them for that, or is that?
well, we have some agreements.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I think obviously it's a life lived of caring for other people, and it kind of comes back, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I've been really fortunate in my life to have a job. I was born in 1938 and graduated from Mars Hill in 1965 and went to work for Holly Farms in personnel.
Okay.
In human resources, and worked for a lady that was enormously nice and good and trained me to be a good person in personnel. Mm-hmm. And so I've been so lucky. Yeah. Main thing I've done was give people jobs and help them, And if the good Lord gives you strength to do things like that, then how can you help from being a pretty nice guy? Although there's been some times along the way that I didn't get to be the nicest guy in the world to stay with a job and stay in business.
Right. Well, it's you know as well as I do. Not everybody does that, but those who choose to, I think it makes a great difference in society. Let's talk about, before we get into the chicken business, just your life of growing up in Wilkes.
Well, I grew up in the cricket community at Route 4 North Wilkesboro, next door to a Baptist church, really next door to a Baptist church. And I was born in 1938. I had an older brother who passed away last year. He lived to be 90, and I had two sisters that came along after that, and we grew up there in a time in the 40s and the 50s that was unlike anything that we've ever experienced before or since. I think we were poor, but we didn't know we was poor. We had plenty to eat. My daddy was a hard working man. My mama was a hard working lady, and they grew gardens and had a little farm. The farm consisted of 11 acres of land, and we cultivated the entire 11 acres in some kind of crop.
You had something growing.
We had something growing all the time. We had chickens, we had cows, we had hogs. Of course, we had 2 big hogs every year that we slaughtered, and so we grew up, and the elementary school was just down the road there in the cricket community. And we just lived primarily at that church. Right. And we had good friends around us, and it was just a wonderful situation.
Do you think, Gerald, that phrase, the Great Depression, it paints a really rough picture about how bad things were, but then there's that other side of where people did exactly what you're talking about, out of necessity.
Right.
And I've heard a lot of those type of stories. And for the most part, they've always led to people that are self-sufficient, and where they may have that in the back of their mind, growing up, they've still managed to tackle life a little bit better from being comfortable that everything's going to work out.
My daddy always talked about a lot the Depression and how hard he had it. But, through all that, he was able to keep a job. Mm-hmm. There was jobs at the furniture factory and here and there, and he went off for a while and worked during the Second World War. He worked in the defense plants in Norfolk, Virginia, a place like that. He always had a job, and he talked about how horrible it was, but I never really quite believed that because it never was that hard. I didn't think on him or us, but if you're not there, then it's not as hard as you think it might be.
Right. You are an optimist, though, right? And I think that's the good thing. Well, obviously, people that have lived through that era, and as we've gone through this journey of talking with a lot of people in Wilkes, we just hear about the generational stories, people who have maybe gone through that difficult time period, but now their kids, they kept going, and now their kids are going. You've got these generational stories about families that not only went through the tough times, but continually focus on doing good things for their families and for the community.
Right.
Do you believe in that?
Oh, yeah. Today's society is enormously different. And we won't spend any time on that because we don't need to at this particular point. But it was a very simple time. You had a garden, you grew crops, you had animals, you grew them, you helped your neighbor. If your neighbor needed a cow, you let them have a cow for that particular season, and it was a great deal of help amongst all those people that lived within a mile radius around you.
Right. Well, that's good. Let's work our way into the chicken business.
Okay.
And I know you've got more in your background, but what about the military? Was that important in your family?
It was important in my family. I have an uncle that my daddy's brother that was in the Second World War. He said that he walked with General Patton all way into within hearing range of Berlin, and so he was able to go through all of that war without being injured in any way, and came home and had married and had 4 kids, and he and them all done well after that. My uncle, another of my uncles, my mother's sister's husband, his name was Raymer, Forey Raymer. He was a Navy guy, and he was on the ship in Tokyo Harbor when the peace agreement between Japan and America was signed. He was a cook on that ship, and he served heroically in that army too. I have a nephew that's in the Marines. I never went. My daddy was getting ready to go into service when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and that stopped everything, and he didn't have to go, but he was all prepared to go in about 3 weeks from the time that happened.
But people in your family have certainly served.
Right.
But now let's step over into the history of the chicken business, because that's something that certainly you're known for, and you have those experiences in your background. Why don't we, from your furthest knowledge point, let's go as far back as we can from what you know about.
Okay. It of course started before this, but my grandfather Forrester, who died in 1926, and obviously I didn't ever know him. He worked for Mr. Eller in the chicken plant up here on 10th Street. The building's still there. The hardware store's in it now. And my grandfather Lankford lived from 1890 to 1973. And of course, I got to know him very well, and he told me all about the chicken processing plant that Mr. Eller built in 1904. He started that in 1904, and his idea was, and he perfected that, was to buy barnyard chickens. Farmers did not have any houses that housed chickens to start with, and that'll come along, and that'll be known as hothouse chickens farms, But the farmer had barnyard chickens, and they would the hens would produce eggs, and they would hatch them out, and they would during the growing season, those chickens would wander around in the barnyard and eat bugs and grass and whatever, and would make reasonably good sized chickens. And once a year, or twice a year, or 3 times a year, he would gather up those chickens in a coop and take them to town in North Wilkesboro.
Now, did he have multiple farmers growing chickens, or how'd that work?
He had multiple farmers growing those chickens. Oh, yeah. Not just one, but most everybody that lived out in the country had barnyard chickens. They had it for 2 reasons. They had it for the eggs, and they had it for their own eating pleasure. Once in every 3 months, they might have a chicken dinner on a Sunday.
Right.
But primarily, they raised those chickens so they could take them to town and sell them to somebody.
Right.
Mr. Eller primarily, and they could take that money and buy salt or sugar or different commodities they couldn't grow on the farm.
Sure.
And they would utilize that way of making a little money to supplement their farming income.
So probably a little more involved than it is today as far as picking up the chickens, I'm guessing, but it was still a rudimentary process similar to what you have today.
That's correct. That's correct. You had to reach down, pick that chicken up, put it in some kind of container, some kind of coop, and transport it downtown. And he would then that goes into what he done with them. There's 2 floors to that building, and he would keep the excess poultry upstairs. And even once a year, he would bring in a herd. We call it a herd of turkeys. A chicken won't herd. A chicken will not. It'll sit down, and you got to pick it up and put it in a coop and take it. A turkey is like a cow or a horse. Oh. They will move along if you will get them in a group. They will move along, and we have people that saw. I didn't see this myself, but I talked to people like Pete Lovett and different ones that lived mainly up around Mellors Creek, and they would be a herd of turkeys would come in from West Jefferson. To North Wilkesboro, they'd put them in that was only done around Thanksgiving and Christmas.
No, wait. So you are saying they were herding them, because I remember when the folks that own the hardware store now were sitting where you're sitting, and they were talking about that too. Now, so just to reiterate, what we're talking about is turkeys coming down 421 or wherever they're cut.
Right.
Roads would have been different then, but that's really what happened.
That's what happened.
Right.
And they would bring those in and keep them. But go back to the chickens. The chickens happened year round. Okay. He would bring those chickens in, and both of my grandfathers had jobs there, and the main job they had was picking the feathers off the chicken, and they had a rack that 25 chickens would hang on, and they would cut the throats and bleed them out, and of course they would bleed out and die at that particular point, and they would take that rack, and they had a vat of water that rack would go over into and scald the chickens, and once you've got to get a proper temperature to scald the chicken so that the feathers will come off to some ease, and they would take and scald those chickens, pull them back out, set them right there, and pick the feathers off, and everything was left. The feet was on, the head was on, the inside was inside, and they would take that chicken, put it in a barrel, and ice it down. They had ice companies around that go way back, and they would ice them down and put them on a refrigerated rail car here in North Wilkesboro and send them to market. Most of those went to New York City, and for whatever reason, they called that chicken, which has everything except the blood and the feathers, a New York dressed poultry, a New York dressed chicken. To this day, in the processing plant, everywhere, at the point where the chicken has been killed and picked, it will be called New York Dressed Department.
Now, did they do all of the chickens that way, or just the ones that went north?
They done them all that way.
Okay, so that was the way.
Right.
Okay.
And he would sell those chickens in North Wilkesboro. To the more affluent people, maybe, and they would take the insides out and quickly cook it, and have it for Sunday lunch. But his business flourished during the early 1900s, 1910, 1920, and it stayed in that building until the 1930s. And in the 1930s, he moved that business to about 3 blocks away, down on Forster Avenue, which is now the Loop. And he had a building there that was backed up to the railroad, and he could take those barrels of chicken and roll them out and put them on the train without having to put it on a horse and wagon and move it that way from where it was at on 10th Street.
So you're talking about putting things on rails. So they must have been processing a lot of chickens.
They would process a good number of chickens. They would. They would do, they wouldn't fill the car up. Okay. They wouldn't fill it up totally, but they would get it a good bit on it, and they would put other things on that car. We around here had an enormous supply of blackberries, and blackberries were shipped away from here and shipped to wineries in the early days, and they made blackberry wine out of it, and so there was a lot of stuff that went on those rail cars, for instance, hams and all different kinds of product that you would find from a farm that would go on that and be shipped out. And maybe they might not go any farther than Baltimore or Washington, but they might go all the way to some place like New York City.
So what I'm hearing you say, Gerald, is that Wilkes County, at an important time in America's growth, right, in modernization, the people in Wilkes County were growing and feeding a large population of people, far greater than the walls of Wilkes County.
That's true. That's true. The other thing that caused Wilkes County to be prosperous was the enormous amount of virgin timber that was here. The railroad got here in about 1900, right? 1890 and 1890 somewhere. And from that point on, there was a tremendous business of cutting timber, sawing it up at the sawmill, and putting it on rail cars and sending it out of here. And that happened from the ram of the mountain all the way from Blowing Rock all the way around to Sparta. And there was thousands of acres of land that had this virgin timber that had never been cut over.
Now, was that part of the story? I remember the story about the big flume that was put in.
Right.
So was that part of servicing that?
Part of that.
Okay.
Part of that, because they built that flume up the Reddish River, all the way up to the head of the Reddish River, and they would put that lumber in those flumes, and they would nail them together so that there was a continual strain of lumber coming down that thing as it kept going, and it would go, continuously, and they would bring it all the way from way up Reddish River all the way down and bring. They would haul that lumber into the flume and send it down and pack it onto those rail cars and move it out. Now, it wasn't refrigerated like the chickens,
sure,
or the hams or the side meat that farmers produced, or the turkeys, but it was on rail cars.
So you're saying lumber. So it wasn't just logs coming down. It had already been cut down.
Right. It had been cut down and sawed up.
Okay.
Sawed up into, and primarily it was sawed up into 4x6s or 4x10, 4x8s or 4x10s.
Right. Wow. Well, that's an interesting piece of history.
Yeah.
That's, but all of it, once again, going back to that whole thing of so much of what it takes to build things, there were some very important components coming from Wilkes County.
Along with all that, and we get off into too many things, but Wilkes County was known in the early days as a big furniture manufacturing operation, and so because of the availability of plenty of good lumber. Mm-hmm. The furniture business came up here, and like American Drew and different furniture companies came up and happened here, and there was a time when enormous amount of furniture was manufactured here in Wilkes County.
Okay, now we're talking, because now what you've done is set the table. So not only do we have chickens being processed here, but now we've got somebody building the tables to eat the chicken off.
That's right. That's right. And the chairs to sit in.
I love that. All right, so we've got this first processing plant, which started where the Wilkes Hardware store is now.
Right.
We call it Wilkes County Hardware, I think.
Right.
So that's there. And we've got this first entree into the poultry business, and people in America are learning about it.
Right.
And eating even the chickens that are being processed, the way they started being processed here, got named a New York chicken. Right.
New York dressed.
New York dressed.
New York dressed.
You can just see him walking down the street.
Right. Right.
All right. Who's another person? I know the Lovett family. They step in soon, right? C.O. Lovett, Charlie Lovett, who's the father of Fred, Rex, and Bonnie and Pete and all of that bunch. They were 7 of the kids. He's the father. Okay.
And he was born in 1900.
Okay.
And grew up here in Wilkes County, and by the time the 20s got here, he had come up with the idea that he had a pickup truck that he would go around to the farmers and buy what they had. Okay. And take it to wherever he could take it, then sell it.
Now, was that after the first processor? Had he already gone out of business, or was he still?
He's still in business.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Eller was still in business. He was still going. That went all the way up into at least the 30s, late in the 30s.
So did Mr. Lovett take chickens there, or other people?
Mr. Lovett took chickens there, but primarily he bought chickens, eggs. He was heavy into eggs.
Okay.
And he bought butter. He bought hams. He bought side meat. He bought rabbits. He bought all kinds of different animals that the farmer produced to sell. And he would take those. If it was a chicken, he would keep that chicken alive. He would keep that alive in a coop, and he would take that. By then, by the 20s. When he got in operation, he was taking those products to Morganton, that had a processing plant, or to Charlotte, who had a processing plant, or Winston-Salem, a more modern processing plant than what Mr. Eller had. Okay. And so he would take those products to those towns, and he would sell that to a grocery store or to a processing plant, or he would park his truck on the street and sell the product on the street, like the hams or the butter,
sure,
or the side meat. All that was sellable to people as they walked up and down in a different era than what we know today.
So it's a combination of wholesale and retail, right? He was doing both.
That's right. He was doing both. And he continued that. He lived to 1973, and he continued that business way on up past modern day processing of poultry and other things. He continued that business, and somewhere in the 40s, he switched from everything else to just eggs. And he just bought eggs, and he would take those eggs and make sure they were clean, and he would take those eggs to different markets around and sell them. And he continued that business until he retired sometime in the 50s or 60s.
Wow.
And then he sold that business to one of his cousins who was a bum gunner. Sometimes you forget things, but his last name was Bum Gunner, and he sold that business, which was called by then Lovett Egg, to him. And then Mr. Lovett retired, and then ultimately died in 1973.
Did Bum Gunner keep the name?
Bum Gunner kept Lovett Egg as the name, and kept it on till he died, and passed it on to his son Terry, and Terry kept that business, and later sold that business back to one of the Lovetts, and the Lovetts kept it and run it for several years in the 80s and the 90s, and then ultimately sold it to a big operation called ConAgra food company, and they sold it to them, and they run it on till they moved it to other places, and it went out of business sometime in the late 1900s.
Wow.
But now
that's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. But there's more.
There's more. And amongst all of that, let's go back to the 20s.
Okay.
There was a guy by the name of T.O. Minton.
Okay.
And Mr. Minton had a big farm up in Mount Pleasant. And when he was a young college person, he decided he wanted to, he was growing chickens, and he wanted to know more about how to hatch the chickens. So he went to NC State for a year. And during that time, and that was in the 20s, and during that time, he learned how, of course, from NC State, how to hatch chickens. He went there for 1 year. That's all he wanted, was just 1 year of that. And so he came back to Mount Pleasant, and he built a hatchery, and he started hatching his own chickens. And he went big. He went ballistic. He built chicken houses, and chicken houses had plenty of lumber, plenty of cheap lumber to build chicken houses with, and he built a bunch of chicken houses for broilers, for eggs, for table eggs, and for hatching eggs. And he had a big business like that. At one time, he had in the late 20s, early 30s, he had 100,000 chickens, either broilers, laying hens, or breeder hens that he had going in that place, in that business.
Wow.
And he
and all that in Mount Pleasant?
And all that in Mount Pleasant. And he done with that, in those days, people that were around, by then people had 500, a house with 500 chickens in it, or 1,000 chickens in it, and so they would grow those and buy those baby chicks and buy the feed and grow them out and sell them to whoever they could down the road, Mr. Eller or Mr. Lovett. Or Mr. Lovett's son, Fred, and that came along a little bit later, and don't want to miss him because he graduated from high school in 1947. And he decided he wanted to start a business in the chicken business, and so he borrowed $3,000. I don't know what that'd be worth in today's dollars, but it'd be big.
More.
Be big.
A lot
he
more.
borrowed enough to buy a truck and hired one guy, and they went around and picked up chickens. And they'd rather stop at a place that had 1,000 than they would to stop at a place that had 500,
of course,
or 100. And he picked those chickens up. He took it, and by then the dressing plant in Wilkesboro had come into being in the early 40s. And a word about that: Wilkesboro, North Carolina, started that plant in the early 40s during the war, just before the war, as a economic development project. And so they built that building and equipped that building, and they sold it to somebody that knew how to run a processing plant. And they happened to sell it to a guy by the name of Ed Hedeker. Now, Ed Hedeker is well known in the history of the poultry business here in Wilkes County, but none of his descendants made it on. But he bought that. He bought half interest in that plant, and his brother Harry, who was skilled in running the plant, bought the other half, and so they owned that plant. And then Mr. Ed Hedeker built a feed mill and a hatchery, and started producing for that. And so that got bigger and bigger. But back to Mr. Minton. Mr. Minton was big and was a good businessman. But what got him, along with a lot of other people between 1900 and 1950, was that they could produce chickens, they could produce eggs, they could produce all of that, but they couldn't market it properly. They could not handle the fact that they needed to sell that product in New York City, right, or Memphis, Tennessee, or Charlotte, North Carolina. They could not get that going for them. And today people can come up with a lot of good ideas, and what usually gets them, what usually is their Achilles tendon, is the marketing part of it, right, the sales part of it. But anyway, back to Fred Lovett. He done that business along with others around, buying chicken, taking it to plants in Morganton, Wilkesboro, Charlotte, and Winston-Salem. And he began to and we'll not go much beyond that with him, but he decided he wanted more of the business than just picking the chickens up and taking them to market.
He wanted to expand what he had to offer. Right.
By then, he was already in the feed business with a feed store. He was already in with people hatching chickens. The hatcheries all came up during that time here in Wilkes. Down the street, right up the street here was a big old hatchery in the 1920s that produces chicken, and they produce baby chickens, and they mail ordered those chickens all over the country. In those days, the mail was much more dependable than it is today. And they would put chickens 50 in a box. And those chickens were good and healthy, and they shipped them off right then, and they could stand 3 or 4 days without feed or water, and the farmer would get them, put them out on his house, and grow them out.
Wow!
And all of that was going on all the time. That Mr. Eller was doing his thing. Mr. Ciolis Lovett was doing his thing. Mr. Minton was doing his thing, and Fred Lovett was doing his thing. But in the 40s. Fred Lovett graduated from high school, and by the early 50s, that processing plant at Wilkesboro had been going for something over 10 years.
Wow.
And he bought half interest in that farm, Holly Farms. The Hedeker guy owned the farm out here on 421 that was called, it was a lot of holly trees on that. And he called it Holly Farms.
Holly
and that's
Farms.
how the Holly Farms.
That's how the name came to be.
That's where the house name came
Oh, Gerald, I know you're not going to believe this. We knew this was going to happen. We've only gone over 8 minutes, but that's okay because we've done some amazing things. Let me see if I can get this right. We have established the first commercial application of chicken processing in Wilkes County. We've looked from it moving to be more efficient from distribution by getting closer to the train. And we've talked about how so many other people have gotten into the business. And now we're in the 50s, and we've talked about really some revolutionary things coming up. So next time when we're together, we'll do a little recap on that. But we've got a lot more to talk about the economic impact of the poultry industry on Wilkes County, and how really feeding the Carolinas and a piece of America has been a very profitable thing to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And very profitable for my family.
Yeah.
Very, very profitable for all of us.
Yeah.
He give a way of making a living that we never would have had otherwise.
Yeah. So what's your favorite part? Let's see. You got a drumstick, you got a thigh, breast, gizzards, liver.
Always the thigh.
The thigh.
The thigh, and it's the most unpopular part of the chicken in America.
Right.
Now, in Australia, that's another story. In Australia, the most popular part of the chicken is the dark meat, the drumstick and the thigh.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, if you go to eat chicken and you have a chance to eat any part, get the thigh first because it's the best part.
Yeah, there you go, folks. Gerald, we'll see you next time. Coming up soon, folks, in a week or so, part 2 of this journey with Gerald Lankford, who has an enormous amount of good stuff to talk about in the world of chickens.
Thank you so much, Carl.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you for spending time with us on Life in Wilkes. We value you as a viewer and appreciate when you share the show with your friends and family. Be sure to bookmark our channel and join us again on the next episode of Life in Wilkes.